Hello and welcome to Astrology with Zeke. So, this is going to be the first episode of a brand new series in which I just do chart readings for, famous criminals and outlaws. And I've actually been wanting to do the chart for this guy for a while. I could have done it to my historical figures series, but since he is a criminal, probably one of the most famous American criminals, I figured I would just do a totally new series where I just do bad guys. So, anyways, with that out of the way, we'll just go ahead and dig into who it is. It's going to be Al Capone, the gangster of gangsters. I'm sure everyone has heard of the guy, even if they don't know much about him. He's the one who brought the mafia or knowledge of the mafia into the mainstream. It was a big deal during Prohibition, and famously, the government could only get him on tax evasion. They literally could not prove anything else. In the end, it will always be taxes that gets you. So, anyways, with that out of the way, let's just go ahead and dig into his chart because I found a number of interesting and surprising things. Okay. So, first things first, probably the most surprising for me about Al Capone is he was a Pisces rising. So you may ask, why is that surprising? Well, Pisces is the sign of the dreamer, the poet, the bleeding heart artist, so to speak, but it's also the archetypal priest, So it was the first thing that made me kind of go, wow, when I saw that for, a notorious criminal like Al Capone. But then I was like, where's the chart ruler? So for a Pisces rising, the chart ruler would be Jupiter. And would you look at that? Jupiter is in Scorpio, eighth house. So eighth house is the house of sorrows. It's of transformation, death, rebirth, the occult. It can be connected with sexuality, uh, debt, shared finances. Um, so it tends to have a lot to do with the darker themes of life. And it's in the sign of Scorpio, which is the natural ruler of the eighth house. And with Jupiter here, Jupiter is the great benefic. It expands, whether it's good or bad, it'll expand whatever it touches. And since it's already in this pretty dark placement, that actually started to make a lot more sense to me. It's like here you got this person who deals with change in like this deep, dark, empathetic way, but he has gone through trials and tribulations like no one has seen before. He is incredibly comfortable with the dark side of life. Um, and while he was American born, he was the firstborn son of Italian immigrants during a time when Italian immigrants were not treated well in America. And, he came into a family where probably felt like he had to cut a lot of corners to get ahead, you know. Um, so, yeah, that being said, his chart ruler doesn't make too many aspects. It does make a nice sextile to Mercury and Rahu conjunction in Capricorn, 10th house, which is about career. And this just goes to show like someone with Mercury and Capricorn, especially in their 10th house, means they got a really good head for business. They're highly ambitious, very serious. They're all about climbing the ladder and they're in it for the long haul. They're patient, but they know exactly what they got to do to get what they want. So this just tells me he was born for business, but specifically since it's connected to the eighth house, that tells me, it's got that connection to that dark side of life or, criminality. So it just kind of goes to show that it was like he was born, to be a crime boss, and he was a good one at that. Highly intelligent, really good at business, and especially with the illegal stuff. So there you go. Anyways, case closed. We're done here. Nah, just kidding. Anyways, that's not the interesting stuff that I want to get into. Uh, anyways, So that's about all I have to say about his chart ruler. Because, like I said, it's not making too many other aspects. But what I will do is talk about the big T square in his chart. Because wouldn't you know it, he was born on a half moon. Um, which, real quick, when someone's born in a half moon, that means the sun and the moon will be making a square. They're not getting along, and it's probably incredibly difficult for the emotional needs to be met. Perhaps the demands of public life, or at least what everybody else sees, are so great that the internal doesn't get met, or they're just constantly at odds. So right here we got the T square. At the apex is his moon in Aries, first house, and it's squaring both his sun in Capricorn, 11th house, and interestingly, a retrograde Mars in Cancer. Now, this is an absolutely fascinating placement because even though Mars in Cancer is a terrible placement, it's in fall in Cancer, is his uh, moon and Mars are in what's called mutual reception, as Mars rules Aries and the moon rules Cancer. So it's very fascinating. What's also interesting is even though Mars is opposing that sun in Capricorn, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So this is just an absolutely fascinating and strange placement, because as we know, Al Capone was a very violent man. We had the St. Valentine's Day massacre, and he was pretty comfortable with doing whatever he had to do to get his point across, you know. Um, Especially in an organization that prized secrecy. He didn't really care too much. So this is just a very interesting placement. What it tells me is he was deeply insecure and had a big chip on his shoulder and constantly felt the need to prove himself to others. Being perceived as weak or feeling like he was being snubbed did not sit well with this man. And he'd be the kind of person to correct that kind of grievance in a violent manner, which again really isn't too surprising for a man with the nickname Scarface. So, anyways, for me, it's just surprising because, people with Mars and Cancer tend to be pretty repressed when it comes to dealing with confrontation and aggression. And with that, Mars being retrograde, that would be even more so. It's more repressed. It has even more trouble expressing itself. Yeah, because it's in this weird mutual relationship with Aries, it just kind of gives it this flair of constantly needing to prove oneself. And it does still come out in an undignified manner in that he would probably overreact a lot to perceived slights. Or if he thought someone perceived him to be, I would use different non-polite words, but if someone perceived him to be less of a man, a wuss, to use PG terms. Anyways, but what another tidbit that's actually pretty interesting is I could tell he had a very large sexual appetite because Mars also rules um, his eighth house and his Jupiter, which again has to do with sexuality. But the fifth house also does have can have some uh, elements of sexuality as it rules creativity, what you do for fun, but also non-committal relationships, romance, and your relationship with children, actually. So this tells me he had a voracious sexual appetite. Especially with a retrograde Mars, that can also mean someone who's got kinks, basically. And it's really not that hard to know this about the guy because, he died from syphilis. So I mean, there you go. So, well, initially it was surprising for me. Once I thought about it more, I was like, nah, actually, this makes sense. Um, the other thing that I wanted to point out is this big stellium that he's got going on in Sagittarius. which most of that stellium is in the ninth house, and then he has the midheaven in Sagittarius as well, with his Saturn conjunct the midheaven. But he's got Saturn, Venus, Chiron, and Uranus all in the ninth house of Sagittarius, which has to do with higher learning, philosophy, foreign things, um, and spirituality as well. Um, Even though Sagittarius is the natural ruler of the ninth house, the cusp of the ninth house is actually in the 29th degree of Scorpio, making the ruler of his ninth house again, Mars. And his Mars is retrograde in a sign it does not like. So this is going to make this stellium express itself in a highly undignified manner. So with that Saturn Venus conjunction right there, that tells me that not only is he highly rebellious, he does not take to following the rules at all. It's probably would probably have violent outbursts to anybody who would try to impose rules on him. And it's probably something that he just really enjoys being, being a rebel, being an outlaw, being in charge of himself and being able to say F you to anybody who tries to tell him what to do. And when you look at that, Saturn, more often than not, just doesn't like being in a fire sign, because Saturn's all about restriction, discipline, someone who's in it for the long haul. And while fire signs are highly creative, they also burn out quickly. So the energy of Saturn really isn't compatible with any fire sign. And while dignity wise, Saturn is technically neutral in Sagittarius, it is ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter and Saturn don't get along. Also, Saturn and Venus do not get along. So what this tells me is this was more or less a behavioral trap for Al Capone that made it very difficult for him to be a well-functioning member of society. It kind of just goes to show, I mean, if he wasn't a sociopath, these are highly sociopathic tendencies, you know, certainly antisocial. He'd be someone who's very comfortable with violence and using violence to get his way, especially if he felt like someone was trying to impose rules or authority on him, you know. That being said, he was still a highly intelligent person. In fact, when he was a kid, he did quite well in school. Uh, except he was in Catholic school and he actually got expelled for hitting nuns, hitting female teachers. So there you go. Yeah, anyways, don't think there's much else to say about that. Oh, actually, there is one last aspect that I want to point out. It's a minor one, but I still just wanted to point it out because it made me chuckle. Is his moon actually makes a sextile to his Neptune in Gemini fourth house. And what this means is not only was he a really, really good liar, is I think he got deep satisfaction out of pulling fast ones on people. So it's just like criminality is just written all over his chart, you know. Uh but yeah, like I mean you just can't get around it. Like the guy is mm, just not necessarily a great person. I've seen worse charts where like a person has absolutely disgusted me. Al Capone's chart just makes me laugh because even though objectively speaking he's not a good person, it's just so plain to see that this man was born to be a gangster, you know, born to be a mafia boss. It's just funny. So, anyways, I think that'll about do it for Al Capone. Anyways, that was pretty fun for me. If there are any other famous criminals or outlaws that you'd like me to do, go ahead, leave a name in the comments. I find checking out their charts pretty fascinating. And yeah, I can do anybody, So yeah, if there's someone interesting or fascinating you'd like to get a look at their chart, or if maybe you think like there's like more to them than the history books say, I'll go ahead and give their chart a look see. So that'll about do it for today. I do chart readings professionally as well. So if you want to book my services, go ahead and check out my website, astrologywithzeke.com, or send me an email at astrologywithzeke@gmail.com. I'll leave all of that in the description below. Anyways, that'll about do it for today, and we'll see you all next time.